for your patience as we are getting acclimated to our temporary, our meeting room for tonight. So this time I call the ad hoc committee on fiscal and operational health to order at 6:10 p.m. A couple of things before we get started and dive into our discussion and committee meeting tonight is, one, I wanted to note that we will approve the May 15th and the May 29th meeting minutes at the next committee meeting. My apologies to my colleagues and to the public that we did not get those in time. But we will make sure we are caught up by our next committee meeting. So the next committee meetings are June 13th and June 27th. And a reminder of the committee's purpose is to enhance the board's fiscal and operational oversight of the superintendent as our governance role. And that tonight, with our agenda, we have goals for tonight are one, committee members understand the superintendent's progress towards creating the fiscal year 24-25 budget. That will get us to CDE's approval. And second, to understand, for committee members to understand the superintendent's plans for the budget and operational stabilization beyond June 30th. And that would include staff sharing initial plans, including even initial ideas, and for us to have this discussion. I also want to know that our fiscal experts are here with us tonight as well. With that, yes, thank you. We will now open public comment on agenda items, and we will take very. You can check please for online. We'll take public comment on the discussion items.
Please raise your hand if you'd like to give a public comment at the ad hoc committee on fiscal and operational health. Seeing no hands raised.
Thank you. And before we open up our discussion items for this evening, I also do want to know that we do not have translation and interpretation services available on site. And however, we will upload the video of this evening's meeting once we conclude. So at this time, I'd like to again review the goal of our item number one. Committee members understanding the superintendent's progress towards creating the 24-25 budget and superintendent.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to actually go into and
okay. Superintendent also specifically around the 24-25 budget incorporates the third interim, as well as I see that your presentations around the fiscal stabilization plan, both phase 1 and 2.
yeah. Yeah, so tonight I want to start off with sharing about the fiscal stabilization plan and particularly what the framework we're working on to submit with our budget for 24-25 and beyond. And then also get into the more detail about what are the areas of focus we need to address to ultimately achieve what is the goal of this committee, fiscal and operational health. So there'll be two major big chunks to the meeting. And similar to last time, just if there's questions or comments, feel free to jump in. And so wanted to share when we presented its second interim let me back up. when we settled with our major labor partners, in order to demonstrate how we could afford the salary increases, we submitted an AB 1200 plan. This is required by the state to submit when you reach an agreement with the labor partner, and it identified budget balancing solutions. At second interim, we shared our progress. We were in the yellow. We made progress, but we hadn't completed we weren't yet complete, and the targets have not been met. So now as we get to 24-25 budget planning, we've completed the activities and our targets have been met, pending CDE verification. So Pam is, and I'll speak to that again in a bit, but Pam Lanzan, who's here with us, is still needing to review review the evidence we have on this, but we wanted to provide an update. There were two major components to the plan. One was shifting $48 million in unrestricted expenses to one-time restricted funds. And the other was reducing $103 million in ongoing unrestricted expenditures for the 24-25 school year. So for the restricted funds, we did complete that shift earlier in the year. But what we found is during budget planning, we really needed to decide if those expenditures would continue for 24-25 or not. And so what we did is we incorporated 28 million of those expenditures back into our unrestricted general fund budget. And we had 20 million remaining in restricted fund. And you might remember in the May 4th letter from CDE, that was one of their areas of concern because it remained in restricted, but we hadn't yet identified how these expenditures would be covered. So since then, as we've been preparing the budget, we have those covered through a combination of new grants, one-time funds, and eliminating positions. And so that has been reconciled on our end, but Jackie Chen, our financial services officer, is preparing so CDE can review and just confirm and verify that yes, this $20 million has been accounted for through these ways. So for example, when we say new grants, we're talking about, we have our student success fund as well as additional community school grant would be an example. So then the big issue is for our unrestricted general fund. What we were very clear on is we would be focusing, at that time, we had over $150 million that we needed to identify budget balancing solutions for to be able to have a balanced budget in the unrestricted general fund. Because we have a significant fund balance, we said for 24-25, we're going to look to eliminate 103 million. And when we presented second interim, there was still some uncertainty about our ability to meet that target, which is also why in the May 4th letter, the CPE said, well, we're not going to agree with the assumptions you submitted and going to count some expenditures that we haven't seen you've eliminated or found additional revenue for. So since then, what we've done is we set up our budget, we've met those targets, again, through a combination of eliminations as well as leveraging new restricted funding. So we talk in budget around object codes that describes the different areas of expenditures, like the 1,000s are certificated salaries, 2,000s are classified salaries, so on and so forth. So we did reduce our central office staffing by the amount specified in AB 1200 plan, and the plan is in the appendix if anybody wants to see. We did reduce the school site staffing, however, and this is where one of the concerns was, we see that when in budget development, there were some positions that were continuing that it was unclear at that time initially, like how could they be incorporated in the budget? But we got the student success fund came in the beginning of April, and this is where positions that were previously slated for elimination or layoffs, like family liaisons, were then incorporated into the student success fund. Then we did reduce our materials and supplies budget and the services and other expenditures budgets accordingly. And also our LCFF calculation is going to bring in some additional funding that will help. So again, you see the asterisk, we recognize CDE needs to be, all the numbers, but we did want to say we worked to make sure that this was incorporated into the plan. So before talking now, so as I said, that covers $103 million of our deficit, but we still have a structural deficit before going into the structural deficit, I'll just pause and see if there's any comments or questions from the board members about our efforts in this first round of fiscal stabilization.
Okay, so I guess so this is very, very helpful top level, as far as figuring out the allocations. What I would like to understand is, what assumptions are in place in order to get us there to actually implement, and like the specific details around reductions. So how much specificity do we, maybe the question is for, our fiscal expert, is this the level of specificity that you need at this time to, to review these and to deem them acceptable, at least for this point in time?
Well, at this point in time, we are going back and double checking the numbers to make sure that they all align with what is being reported. And then in addition to that, I believe that 24-25 at this point appears as if it will be okay due to the new funding that came in and some of the additional LCFF funding. But what we're really then still concerned about is that some of that is still one time. We want to make sure that going forward in your multi-year projection, what it looks like for 25-26 and 26-27. And so based on that, we're going to be looking for more specific information on if you need to reduce it by, say, $50 million, we need to have the detail of what exactly is going to be reduced or how you're going to come up with that reduction, where it's coming from, and actually list out, positions. So I know that as Dr. Wayne goes forward, he's going to be presenting more information, I'm sure, about that. But we'll need to know like how many FTE are going to be eliminated and what, where will that happen, and, the dollar amount of savings. But overall, right now for 24-25, this appears to be, I think, sufficient information.
Okay, so thank you, Pam. So I think just to confirm, because key milestones, which I know that is in also the superintendent's presentation, is specifically around the third interim. That's June 11th. Then the board will have both first reading and second reading of our budget and needs to be approved and respond, to submit a balanced budget by the end of June. So am I hearing you correctly at this time? Have you gotten the chance to review the third interim that I'm assuming staff has submitted a draft to you at this point?
I've seen the third interim. What I haven't seen is the multi-year projection that goes with it. So the third interim is really a report on 23-24. And then on the multi-year projection, once we see that, we'll see what it appears, to look like for 24-25 and 25-26. So that piece I have not seen yet.
And that's a work in progress. We're working on it.
Yes.
And so what are the next deadlines where you're, to get us to June 30th, what are the next set of deadlines as far as the communications back and forth? Since we have 2 more of these ad hoc meetings, like what should our expectations be going forward?
Well, we should be getting the MYP for the third interim. I would anticipate that coming in by the end of this week. And then the following week is when we'll probably see, at the end of the week, we'll probably see a draft of the 24-25 budget, along with, I would think, the multi-year projection, because at that point, they'll be bringing it forward to the board for review at the June 11th board meeting. And that'll be your first reading. And then after that, if there are any adjustments that need to be made, that'll then come back to the board on June 25th. So we'll be following that all along and asking questions if we see that there are changes, what is it that changed and why, and, getting all the details based on that. And where before the district would put in, there was I think it's B10 was the adjustment column on the report where it combined everything that they were looking at making reductions. So it was the 103 million and then the 50 million for the following year. We need the details of what exactly that is.
Okay, and Ms. Lazan, when you say the details staff, do you have clarity about definitionally what that means around details.
Yeah.
Okay,
And just so for 24, 25, and Pam, correct me if I'm wrong, what we have on the screen here is, this was acceptable when we submitted it before. And like behind it, you know, that when we submitted it, like we had, you know, they had the list of 927 positions that were identified. When we say eliminate 927 positions, there was an actual list of that. So now it's for 24, 25, it's just reconciling this, because some things did change between presenting this in December and the final development of the budget, right? Pam?
Right, yes, so we need a
And-
reconciliation of what actually happened. Did you actually get the $40 million, the $10 million? And if not, what was the difference? And maybe in some cases you received more of a savings depending on how it was handled. But, you know, it's easy to look at, for some of this, it's easy for us to look, like we could probably look and see whether the hot spots were taken out of the DOT budget. But in some of the others, it's more difficult, and that's where we need those details.
And so then for the 25, 26, we're gonna show you what we think, but in the end, when we met with Pam yesterday in advance of the June 11th board meeting to go over the agenda and talk about what we're preparing. And again, Pam, not to speak for you, but you had said that how we organize 25, 26, this is the level of information you're looking for, like this kind of summary with it, where you can click on and see what other positions we're talking about.
Exactly.
What I think will need to be very clear, and this was, for lack of a better word, the mistake between submitting AB 1200 and second interim, is surely what we submit on June 30th of 2024 is going to be not exactly correct and not exactly the same as what we submit our budget in June of 2025. Because there's things that change along the year. What we need to make sure in our communication is that when an assumption changes, that CDE and us are on the same page of accepting that that assumption has changed. And okay, now we see why these vacancies wouldn't be eliminated. Or this new revenue comes in, we agree that that's the case. Or you need to reduce more because the state now has reduced COLA by X. Like, that's where there needs to be that tight communication that frankly is what is, you know, didn't happen between the AB 1200 and the budget development, AB 1200 second interim of budget development.
Right.
So if it's okay, we'll go to what fiscal, oh, go ahead, Pam.
Well, I was just gonna say, and that's exactly what your interim reports are for. Because when you build your budget, pretty much as soon as you adopt it, it changes because things move along and you either get new funding or you may find out your funding was decreased for some reason. Once you know what your actual enrollment in ADA is, it affects your LCFF funding. So that's what your interim reports are, to make those adjustments and do your projection out for the upcoming years, in addition with new information you obtain.
And that's why, I don't know that we scheduled them out here, but also when I did put on the board governance calendar proposed dates for ad hoc continuing in the fall. And so that the ad hoc can meet in time to review, in time, you know, it's a little tricky because the first interim reports are based off of and the closing of books on like October 31st. So you don't really know until those numbers, you have a tight window, but we can meet, but before the agenda goes to the board for the ad hoc committee to review where we are. So we are setting that up for the next fall. But let's look at, so what does the part, so you heard we're on target for 24, 25, pending some verification of the details.
Superintendent, before we move on, I do want to note, as a follow-up kind of deliverable product, because we've heard from Tam around wanting to see, needing the reconciliation, so that would just be helpful as well.
Yeah, so that would be included with our budget. Right? Dr. Clark, Jackie?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the reconciliation, not to make people dizzy, but of this. Yeah, that I know, this Chen's working on. Okay. And then, so here's the other thing. So this is, so again, we're talking about 25, 26. But that was one of the major assumptions the CDE disallowed. We had said in 25, 26, we need to make an additional $50 million of reductions. And because they weren't specified, they were put back in our budget. Also, at that time, we said we were going to. Even if we made the $50 million of reductions, we were going to deficit spend by another 35 million, which our fund balance could cover. But after that year, the fund balance is gonna be down to its 2% rainy day reserve. So in light of the May 7th workshop, I guess in light of the, negative certification, the conversation with FICMAT at the May 7th workshop and board discussion, think there's an agreement, we would like to present a plan that fully eliminates the structural deficit. So that's the first thing, when you look at any CDE letter that we've received over the past 2.5 years, and we look at one, remember 2 years ago, the first thing they always mention is the deficit spending and use of one-time funds. San Francisco has been fortunate, we have a lot of one-time funds, we have a lot of restricted funds, but we haven't organized them well, in terms of how we do our budget. So what this slide shows is kind of what I explained. We have the 85 million, that is a structural deficit. And this is based on second interim. And so we're going to develop our fiscal stabilization plan to fully eliminate the spending of 85 million in the unrestricted general fund. So what does that look like? So we're gonna get a little wonky here, but that's why we have an ad hoc committee, so you can go. So here's what has not been done well before in the past. And you've heard particularly Elliot Duchamp talk about, you need to identify what is your core, what can you actually afford to do, and then go from there. So we really have three major types of funds. We have our unrestricted general fund expenditures. That's what should run the district if you be able to run the district. And what the state is giving to say, here's what you have to operate the district, kind of free reign, and it should be able to cover your core expenses. Then we have ongoing restricted general fund expenditures, and this is saying, here's additional funding you get from the federal government and the state government and local government for specific expenditures or specific areas. Like we get Title I to specifically serve free and reduced lunch students. We get P, half of it has to go towards sports, libraries, arts, and music. And then we get state funding like Prop 28, which also has to go to the arts. So those are our ongoing restricted funds, and those funds continue year after year. And where San Francisco is lucky is we get a lot more of those local funds than most other districts. Then there's the one-time funds we get that sometimes come in from the state, sometimes are our fund balance, sometimes are money that wasn't spent from one year to the next and from the grant. And that's where there's the concern when expenditures are there, that when you put an ongoing expenditure in the one-time fund. So here's what so that's what that explains the top row. The way that's kind of universally understood of how to organize the budgets is through the object code. And I explained a couple of those before, so you see on the left, these are the major object codes, and it's really the 1,000s to 5,000s that are the big expenditures, as well as the 8,000s. What the 8,000s are our contributions. That's how we contribute contributions to special education and our routine restricted maintenance. For routine restricted maintenance, you need to contribute 3% of your general fund. For special education, it's on the needs basis of what to provide the service. Okay, so here's what we've done that's really different. That we're planning to do this really different. We are going to, for 25-26, right now, it's kind of covered on the screen there by the closed captioning, but it shows that we have we've projected 708 million in revenue we have. We're going to budget to 708 million. We're not going to budget to 758 million and have a $50 million deficit, or 88 million and have to cover. We're going to budget to 708 million. On our ongoing restricted expenditures, we have 326 million projected. We're going to budget to that. Then the one-time funds, that's where it goes up and down. We're going to see what to do. So I'll go a little bit longer than pause. I know, again, this is wonky, but we want to be clear on what this means. So for the unrestricted general fund, we have that 708 million. We have 190 million that we're setting aside for contributions. That's for special education and for the restricted maintenance. We're also putting in a little bit of a buffer because you all have seen how sometimes special educations can go up. Sometimes the state might say COLA is going down. So we're giving ourselves a little bit of a buffer. After that, we have 506 million to basically run the core functions of the district. We're setting aside 18% of that for central office expenditures, which is what we saw the other districts of comparable size do in California. We've been higher than that in our overall general fund. We want to make sure in our unrestricted general fund, we're at that level. And so that means 82% of it goes to the schools. So what does that entail going to the schools? So what we did put in here, but what we started mapping out is like all the expenditures. So I wanted to give 3 examples here. So that would pay for our 102 principals. We have 102 K-12 schools that get supported, TK-12 schools supported out of the general fund. We have 102 principals. It pays for 1,981 classroom teachers. We have more classroom teachers than that now. Some of that is in the restricted funding. Some of that is because our class size is lower, like our secondary class size average is less than 30 to 1. This reflects a secondary class size average of 33 to 1. Okay, and then we have 78 counselors, but actually for the 24-25 school year, we have 160 counselors. So what we're saying is, for example, we have 78 counselors. That's what through our core, we can afford to provide to our secondary school. If we want more, they either need to come from the ongoing restricted expenditure. So we might say, as part of our VBGGs, college and career readiness is important. We need extra counselors at our schools. We're going to use some of that ongoing funding, maybe Title I for the central pod if we decide, because it supports our free and reduced lunch students, maybe PEEF because it's aligned to our goals. And some of them might be put in the one-time general fund, and then that's the expenditures, then that's the list that Pam is talking about that would see that we would want the board to understand if nothing changes, those expenditures go away because they're only one-time expenditure. The last thing I'll say on this is that so this is what we're preparing. We have mapped out what the 708 million looks like for 25-26 in terms of the actual FTE and at least at the school level. We're working on the general fund, the other 2 categories, and that's what we're looking to have the board to approve and submit with our budget. So before we get to all the other issues that come into FICMAT and the other operational issues, wanted to stop there and see if there are questions from the governance team. And I'll end by saying what Pam and the team talked about, basically organizing these reductions using the same format here within the attached list. Okay.
Commissioner Weitzman. Thank you, and apologies to everyone for this. Long commute. Kids and many other jobs.
And I know you have a mess of just before you came, we were hearing how you need to project for the.
Oh, okay, I will present. First of all, I really appreciate this. On the slide, this slide, so you said, that as it relates to the nearly 709 million and the 326 million, that we are going to budget to this. And the way you presented it was, we're gonna do something new. Instead of budgeting more or budgeting less and just crossing our fingers, we're gonna budget to this. I guess and this is not me trying to be smart. This doesn't feel like a novel approach. It feels like the right approach. And so I'm just for level setting, because I think most of us around the table have not been in this space for too long. Do we know why in the past SFUSD's approach was not this one? Why is this novel right now for us? I mean, it's not novel, right? But why is it new to us?
I'll give an answer, and then Dr. Clark is, you can see she's eager to speak, but, and I can't say I've looked at all the financials. I mean, maybe the district was submitting balanced budgets, but what the district did not have for these years, and it comes up in all the CBE, are the controls on how budgeting was happening, right? And there was not necessarily these clear distinctions between unrestricted, restricted, and one-time funds. So what would happen is through the weighted student formula, schools would get an allocation that they could use for staff, they could use for both core staff, supplemental staff, and other, that types of expenditures. And there weren't tight controls on saying, like, did you match the staff with the right with the right resource, and it was just kind of a chunk sent out. Now we've centralized staffing and we've defined what the core is, so that's the new part, right? It's the first time it has been, I actually like this out too, the way the student formula was implemented in 2004. It's the first time in 20 years, we now actually, instead of that, we have a centralized allocation plan. That's the school resource and budget guide that I shared on May 7th. Like it defines that. So that's one of the new things. What else would you say, Dr. Clark? And one of the reasons why it's new, because for 20 years, it's just been kind of, for lack of, I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but lump funds to schools of all their different funds. It was noted, but basically like, here, now this is what you could do.
Yeah, I just think, one of my observations has been like, looking at the district's budget currently and in the past, it's increasingly clear that the district has kind of plethora of resources that have come in from a variety of funding sources. And so when you're flush with cash and you have that type of money, you know, you can be a little bit more fluid in terms of how you're setting your budget up and moving those expenses around. But as we all know, with the recent salary settlements and the historic raises that were given, the district was put into a situation where it had to immediately start to look at the expenditures that were in the budget, look at the revenue sources that were there, and then figure out how to, you know, fit within the box, recognizing that a lot of those additional funding sources were exhausted for those salary increases. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's different from what the district has experienced in the past. And so now, to Dr. Wayne's point, and to the commissioner's point, what you're doing now is starting to look more like a traditional school district, where they're looking at their ongoing unrestricted resources, balancing that out, looking at the restricted resources, balancing that out, and then using those one-time dollars to fill in the gaps. Versus in the past where, you know, 60 million, 50 million would just come to San Francisco in a variety of different ways.
Like, and one quick example, like, I mean, I think, no exaggeration, in the past year and 3 months since Dr. Clark has started, I think we've shifted what, about 150 million to restricted expenses. Nobody was looking at that. And I mean, you hear CDE say that all the time, use the most restricted first. And I say that because, right, it was 95 million we did last year. And then you saw we did another 48 million this year, where there just wasn't the controls and the monitoring of how the expenses, how the funds are being expended.
Well, that was a big shift to start to utilize to the maximum extent possible, the most restricted resources first. And you know, but again, if you have all this money, it's, nobody really worries about how to balance that out. But now we're having to really focus in and hone in on every dollar that the district has and make sure that we're utilizing it and leveraging it to the best of our ability to meet the needs of the students.
So I do have a question that's, and I really appreciate this, the breakdown of just the 3 basic categories and then the earmarkings of how they work. What I'd like to understand is outside of core, now that we've established what core is, which is baseline sufficient, which is one of our guardrails, right? So thank you. How and when do those decisions get made about how to use the restricted and unrestricted funds? Because now we're starting to talk about how is this gonna hit our school sites and when? And so how is that prioritization process being done?
So, I want to give, both Jackie but also Anne Marie credit, like, when we gave out the school budgets this year, we were showing what funds we're doing, paying for what. So for 24-25, it's already organized. For 25-26, frankly, right now, the first thing that gets submitted is gonna be based off of what we've organized for this year. And then just looking at what our priorities are, having in the one-time column, what's least aligned to our priorities. So it is essentially us taking a first pass at it. What's gonna happen then is, this is why I say they're gonna change, and it's gonna be fully real. What you're gonna see on June 30th, you know, we're gonna work to get as detailed as possible, and you know, that's what CD is asking. You're gonna see a lot of things that you're like, wait, these might seem really important to do on that one-time list. Well, then we have 24-25 to do the more thorough budget planning, because there's 3 ways to keep those funds. One, again, getting more one-time funds. 2 is, I guess maybe there's 2, and 2 is putting those expenditures in the, oh yeah, sorry. One is having more one-time funds, two is getting more revenue. And then three is shifting things into the ongoing expenditures by eliminating expenses there. So I just wanted to use this as a concrete example of just being real. We're talking next year about, school closures and we have fewer schools. So right now, in our unrestricted general fund, we are budgeting for 102 principals. We have fewer schools, we would need fewer principals. That would then free up money from the unrestricted where something could move into it. So to summarize my answer is first pass that you see in June is gonna be based off of our 24-25 budget and listing then the things that are the least furthest from the core. But then during 24-25, we're gonna have this discussion with community, with board about, okay, how do we want to shift that based on what our priorities are, or what revenue we're getting, or decisions we're making about our school portfolio.
So just for, if I'm a family in the district, how different will 24-25 feel?
To 25-26.
To 23-24.
Um,
I mean, we have the staff, I'm
Yeah.
I'm really trying, I'm trying to get through like the operational implementation. And then at the same time, we're layering changes on top of that, so.
well, for 24-25 this coming year, you've heard some of that.
Yeah,
You're hearing that in some schools, there's, classrooms are bigger.
yeah.
You've heard about some positions that aren't coming back. I'd say those are the two main implications. Fewer, fewer consultants and more narrowing of that. But then you also hear, like, we did prioritize our curriculum and the coaching around that. So like even if some schools lost, something like an elementary advisor, we focused in on having the coaching, but that's what you'll feel in 24-25. 25-26, you're gonna feel even more because you might feel, that's where we're looking at the real
And so,
significant change.
sorry.
Yeah.
So moving forward into 24-25 and knowing that there needs to be additional, cuts, and modifications, what is that process looking like? Because then we start, we have talked for not so much recently, but for many years, there was talk about bottom up budgeting and like.
Zero.
I was told zero base isn't really fair because we have things that are, there are things that are just baked into the budget. There's no zero to start with. So, but looking at the bottom up baseline, so now that we have core, so what is the process by which we're gonna look at, all the programs and frankly, the extras that have been layered on that may or may not be working as intended. So what does that look like? I want to
Yeah.
as a board member.
Yeah, no, I think then, do you want to share? But I think we're gonna need to define that more as we get to the beginning, of next year.
Okay.
Yeah, but go ahead.
I agree with that, but I also think, in looking at the district's BVGGs, to Dr. Wayne's point, the things that are most aligned with BVGG would be the things that you would either fund out of core or fund out of the restricted resources. But there may be other things that individuals may perceive as a priority that just, while it may be important, it may not necessarily be funded, but that could look different at every single school based on the needs of those schools. The staffing, the number of students in the class, the counselor ratios, the teacher ratios, those things may also look different going into 25-26. Because to Dr. Wayne's previous slide, $85 million now is what we're looking at in terms of reducing out of the unrestricted general fund. And that's not a small amount of money. I mean, you're not gonna just cut that and not have individuals feel that. But I think if it's thoughtful, if you're still holding true to all of the VBGGs, you can potentially still prioritize the things that you value the most. But then there are other things that will have to either come out, or there will have to be consideration for ways to generate additional revenue. And when you're looking at balancing the budget, it's either increasing revenue, decreasing the expenses, or some combination of the two. Those are the options. But for San Francisco, there's a lot of local funding, there's a lot of state funding that comes in as well. But again, thinking about the things more strategically and targeted to figure out, is, while this is in the budget, is it really connected to the VVGGs? And if it is, where is it on the list of funding priorities? And if it's not, quite honestly, it's gonna be something that's gonna have to come out of the budget.
Okay, so I think I have my, but, from more of an operational standpoint, because, you know, using the examples that that you were raising before, when you're in a situation that's flush, you can try a lot of things, there's a lot of opportunities to generate new ideas and enact them. And from what I've observed, there's a lot of wheels that have been created. And so whether, like, I'm even thinking about our key SLAM funding, how are we? Because I can imagine a world where there's a lot of different things aligned with our VVGGs, but not all of them are effective. Or some of them are more effective, or we have like 6 different wheels that have been invented and like one of them tends to work best. So how are we looking at both our expenditures and our efficacy around student impact and outcomes? Is that? Because
Yeah.
I mean, we have 20 years of SLAM. And it's kind of all over the map, for example. And, but all of it, like the concept is good. I don't think there's anybody that's gonna say SLAM isn't important, and we have a centralized funding source that it hasn't been managed from a centralized way, or even monitored.
Yeah, I think this is, we're gonna need to be, again, I think we're gonna need to develop this more in the fall. I think what we're doing though, and Pam and I were talking about this, like from the CDE perspective, they just really need to see what's gonna be on this list that I'm.
Yes, oh, no, I
But,
get, yeah.
but the reason why we're doing the core, we're going it the way you said, is for the reason that you said, like. Let's think about what we're trying to do and then what's extra. Now, the defining the extra, yeah, we need to work on that. But I guess what I can say definitively, and this is the case, because of the pressure we're in, and I feel like I'm channeling Elliot here a little. Is we're gonna be starting that when we submit, you know, this fiscal stabilization plan on June 30th. So we're launching the conversation.
Okay,
You know, then how that conversation continues, we're gonna have to figure out that more in the fall. I mean, some of it will continue through resource alignment, you know, what we're doing around there. But to your point, like, that's a great example. Like, you know, last night the board talked about doing a policy, and you didn't say it like this, but I feel like policy and resolution diet. There's a lot of things that, you know, when we were flush, it was like, oh, we want reports on this and we want things on that, but are they actually impacting student achievement? Like, those are the good questions to ask. We kind of still need to think through our process a little bit more about that.
So I was just raised that's where I see this ad hoc committee, being able to be one of those platforms or avenues for this. So, for example, Superintendent, since you did raise, the potential under, President McComedy, if we are looking to extend, you know, beyond our June because of the purpose, and our outcomes that we're setting for this ad hoc committee, is to then get more crisp on what those key milestones and actions are, because frankly, I understand it's a complex system. And, you know, we have lots of assessments, and both FICMAT and CDE have outlined for us of where we need to strengthen. But I think at a board governance level, being able to hear from staff, from you all, you know, again, starting that process, you know, now, as we go through budget development and into the fall, what those key milestones or actions are, so we can kind of map with you all. Because I think what I've seen or experienced either as a parent over the last 15 years or now, you know, on the governing team, is that, because things are complex and we're trying to move all things at once, but at the end of the day, then it's like almost a scramble. And then we miss, you know, and we may rush through things, or then we don't get the detail that, you know, for example, CDE might need. So that's just something I've been thinking about. And this is done in collaboration, not that we're designating you on the, on superintendent or your team on the how, but we have to understand as the governing body around what those key milestones and actions are, and when we're off track, similar to student outcome governance, when we're off track, then to be able to understand what are the adjustments that are necessary so that we could get back on track, because this is when we can't quote, get off track, because then we will potentially, the risk is losing local governance, which is not any of our goals or intentions.
I just say, I really appreciate that, and then just so, like, I feel like these are the forums where, this is a good forum to have these discussions, just since you brought up Pete. Like, something that I think is new, so what I have on the screen here is our school staffing and resource guide. There was an allocation plan for PEEP funds previously, but it was a little bit, from a parent perspective, I would say it was hard to follow, right? So here, from a parent perspective, and a, you know, board member, commissioner perspective, with not knowing the details, is very clear. Families at elementary school should expect their students to get 1 hour of PE, 1 hour of library, 1 hour of arts, 1 to 2 days of instrumental music in 4th and 5th grade. For this is the, you know, physical education, librarian, arts for elementary. Now, this is where the debate comes in, right? Like Mr. Holland's Opus does the report, and you know, they do a report for districts on like instrumental music, and the PCAC is recommending there's more instrumental music. Right, our response to the PCAC was, we need to get our budget organized to see before trying to expand something. But these, to me, feel like the kind of conversations we want to have. It's like, okay, here's what we're saying is expected. If we want to do, and you can count on, if we want to do more, we're gonna need to find it from someone else, somewhere else. Or is this an area where we want to do less?
Well, and also just ensuring that that is happening.
And then, well, then there's the my, yeah, I mean. Yeah, but now what's good is if a family says like, well, I'm not getting an hour of art a week, like, oh, well, we gotta make sure that's being followed up on. But I understand we don't wanna wait for a family to say that.
No,
What's our monitoring of that?
and I'm resisting going down this.
Oh, yeah, but see, it could be a whole, a rabbit hole to go down when we get to the detailed planning.
That was just a whole conversation that happened right there. I don't know what you guys been talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Other questions and comments? Or we can go to the, so that's one, I mean, again, if we eliminate deficit spending and our reliance on one-time resources, on the one hand, you know, the state would, you know, would say, oh, great, you know, we don't need to worry about you fiscally. That's not the only piece of the puzzle, and in fact, one of the reasons it's been hard to eliminate deficit spending using one-time funds is because our other operations haven't been well organized. So at the last meeting, and Commissioner Lamb referenced these, we set some broad milestones about what should be happening between now and December 15th. And to get a and so what we wanted to do is talk about, and what you wanted to talk about was, what does it look like at the next level down of like, okay, how do we know the progress is being made, and in what area should we be looking for progress? So we've gotten a lot of memos from the state over the last 2.5 years that describe what we need to do. They basically fall in these buckets. So I was going to turn it over to the team. We already talked about number 1. That's the deficit spending and use of one-time resources. So you see everything's kind of in progress. We described where we were for that. So now I'll turn it over to the team to talk about 2 through 6. So we'll do a brief overview of each one. And then I think the goal of the conversation is what questions you have, that then by next time we come back with what does the dashboard or the progress monitoring report look like at the right level. So with that, team, I'm not sure who's talking about which one, but who wants to start with budget development?
Let me just start with, for the, budget development, first of all.
Project.
Nice and loud.
Oh, okay. First of all, we look at the, enrollment projections, as I, speak, now, we just updated the LCFF for calculator based on the most current P2 data, and then the enrollment projections, and along with the COLA. it's still in progress, and for the budget development, we are working on balancing each of the resources, and in order to have, the whole budget book and being developed. So we are still working in a very detailed level, resource by resource.
Can I just say something real quick? Number two, the budget development, the status update. Well, in addition to that, the most important thing I think that the district has not done previously was to adjust the number of teachers and other staff to align with the declining enrollment. And so really over the last few years, that's one thing that has impacted your budget. And one of the ways that you can work towards that in this upcoming year, working towards what is being proposed for 25-26, is that if you know that you are eliminating certain positions and you have a position come open, rather than fill the position, since you know that at some point it's going to be eliminated anyway, it'd be better to go ahead and leave that position open and just eliminate it then you don't have to offer a pink slip, in the future. So you need to monitor that throughout the whole year going forward, but looking forward to the next year. So that you can always kind of shift that around. Say if you decided you were going to eliminate we'll say assistant principals. If you were going to eliminate 30 assistant principals and you have 3 positions that are open during the year that come up and they're at elementary level, and you know that that's probably a position that might be eliminated next year, then you should just not fill it. And then that way you don't have to worry about pink slipping anybody the following year. But those are the kind of things you have to kind of do with that alignment, and also if you end up having less enrollment than what you had projected.
And I'm gonna add to that, as the secondary element of that is ensuring that the district has a strong and defensible seniority list. So if you do have to go down the process of laying off staff and you have to go before PERB, it's defensible, and you could potentially win a situation like that. That's really critical, should the district actually be in a situation where layoffs are, in fact, necessary. I'll go to number 3 and number 4, and I'll talk about the 2 of them together because they're connected in 2 different ways. First and foremost, the frontline implementation is moving forward. As we sit here today, we are in a green status with everything that we have set up. That system does include a very strong and tight position control process. The system gives the district the ability to account for all of its staff, its FTE in a variety of different buckets. It also gives the district the ability to encumber salary for the entire year, which is not what we have in place right now. So we're constantly having to look and do manual calculations to project out. So going into that system, you'll have the ability to have a tighter control over positions within the district. In addition to the position control system, there's also the elements of the system where we will be able to like tie everything together, the budget, the procurement, the general ledger, the human resources system, and then any adjustments on a regular basis. Right now, what happens with the district's general ledger is, there's this massive reconciliation that happens at the end of the month. It takes several weeks to get it done. And you don't always have real-time data. When I first came into the district, I think it was a delay of about, 6 months of the general ledger expenses not being in the system. We've tightened that up, and we're pretty close to about 3 weeks off from the end of the year. But going into this new system, you'll actually have real-time data. So anytime, payroll runs, you'll see the expenses hit. That gives the district the ability to look at those expenditures and make adjustments and recalibrations in real time, which is different from where we are right now.
Dr. Clark, I had a question.
Yes.
Because I know, as this new adoption of the ERP system, you've talked about, the green light status. I'm curious around the risk around, we've talked about traction, so, and the learnings over the past 3 years. So could you share a bit where, anything that's emerging or potentially that's gonna emerge around this, because how important the position control is. We heard that loud and clear from Elliot, Pam, and Thickmat. You can just share a bit, because we understand it's like look, Frontline is a baked-in product for traditional TK-12 systems, but it's not the box system I'm particularly concerned about. I'm really concerned more about what are the risks as a district to be able to get the information that is necessary so that the system can flow as it needs to.
Yeah, so there are a couple of different risks. I'll start by saying, the biggest risk to getting this project over the finish line is going to be staff's capacity to meet the due dates and deliverables. Because as you can see, there's a lot of competing demands. But if we start missing due dates, if we start getting delays, and then those things start to compound, then that's gonna get us off of our aggressive timeline. I think the other thing is also looking at vacancies that still exist within human resources and within the business services department. Now, in business services, Amy can talk about HR, but in business services, we've been pretty aggressive about getting a lot of these positions filled. But there still are some vacancies in critical areas. People are in the pipeline to get them filled, but the project is up and moving. And so those new individuals coming in are gonna have to be caught up to speed on what the current system is, and then we're gonna also have to bring them up to speed on where we're trying to go. The other thing is, looking at the data that is in the 14 different systems and making a decision on what to import and what not to import. So I can tell you now, in many instances, we're probably not gonna import the data. Like, we're probably gonna just start at ground zero. And if there are instances where we are importing data, the reconciliations are huge. Make sure that we have at least, I'd like to say a 95% confidence level, but quite honestly, I'm at an 80% confidence level that the majority of the data that we have is accurate. We're going into this knowing that we're going to have to do some cleanup, but it's mitigating that cleanup just because a lot of the data is so messy. But for some of the data, we're not gonna import it. We're just not gonna do it. Because if we did it, we would never get this project over the finish line, or we would spend years trying to clean up data that we already know is not where it needs to be. And so those are like some of the big pieces that I've seen. I think also what I've seen in San Francisco is that you have a lot of meetings and a lot of people coming together to make decisions, but then they don't always make the decisions that need to happen. And so one of the things that my team is working with the district on is like holding that meeting, walking through the issues as much as possible and making a decision in that meeting so we can keep the project moving, and resisting the temptation to have 4 or 5 different other meetings for things that really should be basic practices and concepts. But that notion of decision-making, using the information that you have to make the decision in that moment has to be replicated across all the different areas that will be affected by the frontline system. And there's work to be done in some of those areas, but for now, as I sit here today, the project is on track, but those are things that we're monitoring. And as concerns come up, I'm working with Dr. Wayne and the team to address them as much as possible so that we can keep this project on track. And I've said this once before, and I'll reiterate it again. I'm putting it in the universe. Should I still be with the district at this time? My goal is to have the 25-26 budget built in the new system. That means that we have to have everything in place by the end of this year, so that January 2025, we can build a budget in that system. And I know that's a big goal, but to go through another year of building a $1 billion budget on Excel spreadsheet is just, you should not do that.
I was surprised. So I guess like a specific example is the seniority list. Cause like the frontline will not fix the seniority list. So, and I know in the last meeting, we talked about September 15th as being a key deadline. So what, it would, there's a lot that's predicated on having a defensible seniority list. So would you like to share any, key milestones or status updates? Okay.
Right, and we said, oh, yeah, we said seniority list classified in certificate finalized by October 15th and verified by December 15th.
Right.
It's covered on the bottom.
Okay, yeah.
That's what that slide says.
And that's just something that happens routinely in most districts, the big task of the seniority list is to add new employees to the bottom, right?
Yeah.
But this year we sent out a seniority list to all employees and asked them to verify their information. So that was the first time in many years that that's happened, is my understanding. We corrected almost 1,000 errors. So, you know, that we've done a lot of that work already. You know, we're fortunate that we didn't have to put that to the test of layoffs this year. But I'm confident that, you know, that we will use the data from the new system going forward. But we have a standalone seniority list that we're ready to move forward with and add new employees as we go.
Okay. All right, that's helpful. And then, so going back to the six project, I think, or whatever, on the previous.
Yeah.
One, it would be. And I do want to get through I want to hear all the updates on all of them, but, as we move through, understanding who's on deck. The accountability and the ownership piece, just, because as opposed to decision by team or non-decision by team, you know, who knows and is responsible for driving. Yeah, do you wanna?
So I think that's just, so I know, sorry, we're being kind of loose in
Yeah.
facilitation right now. Why don't we have the staff go through
All the lists?
all the
Okay.
priority areas, and then as a
Okay.
committee, we should talk through
Okay.
kind of our expectations moving forward of the evidence of the plan. And we don't need to know every 1,000 rows of the plan, but we need to be able to land on those clear milestones. So that when we start to go into yellow, we don't want to ever be a red, you know, we don't want to be a red because we should have known. We should have known when it goes from green to yellow. So I think those are kind of examples of
Yeah.
that, and who's the owner of what, at the highest level.
Yeah, no, and that's good. I think because you also, the way you phrased your question gave me an idea for what you all might be looking for, so.
Okay.
Okay, so there was, oh wait, I gotta
Yeah.
get back to the other slide.
Is that sound okay?
Yeah,
We-
that sounds
We
great.
talked
Perfect.
about, so we talked about 3 and 4, and Jackie just left. Do you want to,
Yeah, I can talk.
declining enrollment?
Declining in enrollment, Jackie talked a little bit about, you know, what she's doing, but it's also in alignment with declining enrollment. And the other piece of this is making sure that there is an updated demographer's report. And not just having the updated demographer's report, but then comparing and contrasting that projection to what's actually occurring within the district. Jackie talked earlier about LCFF adjustments and calculations. You know, we built it based on the demographer's report, but again, constantly recalibrating to see where we're landing. We're slightly higher than what the demographer said. So even though we declined, we did not decline as much as that report projected. And that's okay, as long as we're constantly monitoring that and making sure that when we see any trend or anomaly that, you know, the budget, especially revenue projections, are being adjusted. And then also the ADA to enrollment. Jackie talked about the P2 reports and making sure that those monthly reports are coming in, that they're accurate as to the best of staff's ability. And then also ensuring that either P1, that we're monitoring P1, P2 and annual reports and adjusting the budget in tandem.
And for the EDA, like the percentage, and from the last time saving from, and we projected as 91.5%, and based on the P2 data, I adjusted even more like higher because we do see the trend of the 88% is higher as the 92%. So those are the updates, and we are monitoring on like a quarterly basis, P1, P2, and then we will have like a P annual as well.
That's right, the ADA is average daily attendance. We're seeing that because we're actually gonna be, we're reporting we met our interim guardrail around serving the whole child and reducing chronic absenteeism. So that
And that's
actually has
really
a direct, direct.
That's really important.
Yeah.
That's really important because you can have this, we're projecting at 92%. But what happens if you get it to 93 or 95%? I mean, that could be millions of dollars, for the district. And you also have children that are here getting the education that they need and being served.
And I would also like to add in more feedback on what Dr. Wynn just mentioned, that we are putting, we call unrestricted and restricted, but dividing the restricted into two pieces. Because one is the continuing restricted, and then the other part is the carrying over or one-time restricted. So we are differentiating those because I would call it restricted, unrestricted, because they are continuing money and a lot of money like we know like a P or 50% you spend money on the SLAM, 50 on the other general fund uses. So those are the funding really can help us in building our current year's budget. For example, we use the $10 million in our currently our next year's the budget and to support the special education and increase the cost and things like that. So we are mapping it out based on unrestricted, restricted, unrestricted, and then the restricted. And so mapping out those two and also help the district to prioritize the core need. So if the core need we are going to base on using the unrestricted, and then those supplemental we're going to use like SLAM, and those are the unrestricted, restricted. And for those like soft funded prioritize the district need and based on the students' need, and we're going to really be careful and communicate with the board and what kind of positions and under the guidance of Dr. Wen and the positions we're going to find out over there and to meet our target in 25-26.
And so, then let's get to others so we can have the discussion. I do just want to show, briefly, like, just so you get a picture of it. And again, I don't know that you need all this detail, and this might be, let me make it a little bigger to see, but when we say we have 350, or 326 million of ongoing restricted funds, like, here's what we're talking about. And when we say, the city of SF, the city of San Francisco is very generous with the school, so here's what we mean. So like all these, you've heard of Title I, these are all federal ones, but you go to QTEA, right? This helps pay for salaries. We get 37 million for that. And that is kind of dictated how it goes based on an MOU with our labor partners. But there's also 15 million that is not part of the MOU. FWEA, I forget what that stands for, one's Quality Teacher Education Act. I see that this thing keeps coming, but then like you see for P, so that's when Jackie and we're talking about all these ongoing restricted, these are funds we can count on. And we have some flexibility, for some we have more flexibility than the others, but we have some flexibility to determine how to use it. So now going back to this, there's the training piece, again, it's being covered. Is there a way to move the
On your screen, if you like, bring it.
Yeah.
it's not on my screen though. I'm not showing it on my screen.
Oh.
But anyway, so what is sent under the other is ongoing training from Council of Great City Schools. So we've been doing that. In part, that was from the CDE of just wanting the board to be focused on the right things, like you have been. And then there's also, we saw, and this came out in the FICMAT report too, about we're not a district that's an island, that we part of the state. And there's a lot of resources in the state, so participating in the state regional workshops. And then, so like Jackie brought business services to CASBO, that's the California Association of School Business Officials training. Amy has brought staff to training for human resources that they haven't been to. I forget the acronym for yours. The AXA trainings, and so Association of California School Administrators. So we're doing that, and then you heard about the increasing in staffing. So, okay, so those are the major areas. And Yeah, if you want to share, like, so I had an idea, but you can all.
Okay, I just want to do a time check, so, we had a board meeting last night, so, I would like to get us to wrap up within an hour and 45 minutes, which leaves us about 25 more minutes. So I want to take the remaining of this particular section of it is to talk through, from the committee's point of view, what makes up, plans at the governance level that makes sense to allow us to do the type of monitoring that we need. So it gives direction, I think, to the superintendent around some clarity around that. The other piece of time I wanted to spend, discussion on, was also agreements around, how do we start to, work towards the achieving of the fiscal and operational stability. So I think that's just important because it's not only kind of, checkboxing through what CE and FICMAN has, outlined for us, but it's also about beyond that, and it's really about the sustainability and the fiscal operations and health overall for the district. So Superintendent, how does that sound as far as our time for the this section of the discussion?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. You mentioned you had
Oh,
an idea.
Well, yeah, two things. One is, I like the question you asked about what are the risks, right? Because like you said, you're not really, it's not appropriate or effective for you to go over the, hundreds of tasks that we have. But rather than just asking where are we on progress, naming what those risks are and checking on those risks might be an effective component of monitoring. It's kind of like when we've given you updates around some topics, we say, here's the update, and then we say, here's what you might hear, right? Like from others who are looking at it with a critical eye. Just thinking of that sense that like is, almost risk monitoring as much as progress monitoring. That's one idea. The other one I just wanted to put on the screen is that when we talk about the right level, President Matamati and I shared this as just a way to think about it. And here, so if you look here, this was for the new ERP implementation. So this is the summary dashboard. Wait. Why is it not showing as a slideshow? I'm sharing, right? It's my screen to share.
Yeah.
Yes, if you click slideshow at the top right.
Yeah, no, it's showing on mine. Okay, well, what you can see here, I don't know why it didn't change, but basically like the slide that had the overall dashboard, which is one before, seemed too high level. The slide that had like all the details was too low level, and then so finding the Goldilocks just right. So, but you don't get the visual, so I'll stop talking.
Well, I think for an example here, if we just look on the SFUSD plan of action, just reactions to the presentation, is that it would be helpful to understand for areas 1 through 5, what are the 3 to 5 key milestones and the actions within it, and then as well as the quote evidence of risk. So that, like, for example, when Dr. Clark was walking us through position control, I had asked specifically, what are some areas of risk? And she named, staff capacity in order to meeting those due dates. Because if we miss those due dates, it's going to compound further down the road. So I think it would be really helpful for this committee to understand what are those due dates? Because I right now don't have an understanding, is it next week or is it 2 months from now? So again, not that we're managing your day-to-day operations, but is to give this committee and ultimately the board an understanding of kind of looking out, for example, 3, 6, and 9 months out, so that we know what to look out for. I don't know if that's an example that.
Yeah.
Members.
And I think if I would sort of add to something, and I think maybe it was President Matamati who did this, it might have been Commissioner Lamb, but in addition to what was just suggested, I think understanding, especially looking at the plan of action, who holds these.
Yes.
And I understand that this is work that is gonna be done across departments, it has to be, but knowing like, not so much where does the buck stop, but like, who is the main holder of this that is coordinating, facilitating amongst the other folks involved? And this came up, I don't know if it was the May 7th meeting, and there was, I think, was it the May 7th meeting, or was that, I don't remember what meeting, but there was a preliminary list of who was holding certain things, and I think it
Oh,
felt,
the
was
dashboard, yeah.
that the dash?
Yeah, our dashboard begins to list for the owners,
Okay.
yeah, for
So-
some of the specifics.
So I think for us, and from a perspective of governance, just knowing that someone has been identified for, and obviously, for example, and I don't think, I think probably, hopefully they're not all with you, Amy. But some will be, right? And some will, maybe others won't. For example, um, ongoing training from Council of Joint City Schools, actively participating, like that's gonna not be with Amy.
Just keep it in mind.
Is this what you meant? So this is what I was trying to show. Here's the overall dashboard. I know it's a lot to see, but you can see like the green circle. And then see here where it says like project schedule, help, project scope, things like that. But then if you go down, here's what's a little bit more like, of the project, there's three major areas. System work stream, finance work stream, and HR payroll work
Can
stream.
I ask a question?
Yeah.
How does that map onto these this?
Correct, that's,
Like
that's,
Well-
putting them together?
Yeah, well, this is for monitoring the ERP.
Okay,
Right.
so something like that,
That's-
then
For
that
this.
maps onto this.
Yeah, and then below this, the part you don't wanna see, you don't need to see, but you need to know exists, is this is that slide I think you were referring to. Where it says like each
Yeah.
task, who it's assigned to.
Yeah.
And then we have the governance structure as well. Like maybe we need something like this for, like this could be the model for to do it for that, for those 6 areas. And then list the risks and, you know, list the, major activities and risks, and then have some yellow, green, red.
and I think I'll have to do a little processing, like, it may not be just limited to the 5, because I want to make a crosswalk between the,
Figma?
FICMAT and to CDE, and then beyond kind of the overall fiscal and, operational systems of all.
Yeah, I'm trying to, and I would like to get Pam to weigh in, so we don't, because, so there's a few, when I think about a dashboard. Part of it is the CDE deliverables and things like, plan for closing out the audit, deficiencies. Plans for addressing the FICMAT deficiencies. And then within the scope of work. We have these general categories, which I think are a really good starting points that are up there. But within that, there's going to be things that are statutory and compliance deadlines. And so I want communication of that, but then there's also. Internal deadlines. Board intersection. And so understanding like how these parallel paths are being managed and intersect. 'Cause I think part of what has been unclear to me is like, I'll get, we know when the first interim is due, like it's just due, or we know when, these external deadlines, but the working backwards. And what that means from an operational standpoint and the risks associated. And necessary or desired board action or guidance in that process. Would be, like, I see that as part of, even how we're building out the governance calendar. And just mapping out those and then there's, also how the board is going to be getting information, whether. We tend to focus on what's happening in the board meetings, but there's also ways to provide internal deadlines as far as giving opportunities for the board to be great. I mean, I know I'm a little bit all over the map, but part of what I worry about is like, I don't want to be only focused on what the CDE is saying. I want to also remember that we do have, educational purpose and priorities that the board has communicated, and keep those moving, recognizing there's also a heavy operational lift internally, and being respectful and real about what's going there. But Dr. Clark, tell me about your, yeah.
No, we're just
Yeah.
thinking because it's a lot of pieces to bring together and put in one comprehensive document. But what I was sitting here thinking was just like, for example, for the FICMAT reports, you know, what I've seen in the past with these type of reports is here's the deficiency FICMAT identified. Here is the district's plan of action. Here's the timeline that the district plans to implement that action. Here is the status update. You know, and it could be, you know, pending, whatever, but then there's a constant update that's coming to the board until that particular item is complete. I'm trying to think through, like, all the detail that goes behind it.
I don't
but-
wanna, yeah, that's
Okay.
not what I'm, that's
Okay.
not at all what I'm suggesting.
No, but I am suggesting though some clear, like, cause work in progress without like a time frame is like, it's. But it would be more helpful to be able to understand how you all are measuring yourselves against those milestones. Like I said, I don't have an understanding when we say work in progress, is it when have y'all set that for yourselves, right? And the board engagement on that.
Yeah.
What I'm also hearing is from President Montgomery is there a point in time where the board needs to be made aware of some critical information in order to inform or guide that doesn't feel rushed and doesn't feel like too little too late, right? So putting all of that organized, that intersectionality, I do think it's a good push because I don't think we normally map out all of this. So in a stable system, these things, you know, we're trying to intervene, so it's gonna be a very robust matrix of all those pieces. So
I think we have all the pieces,
Mhm.
we just gotta put them together.
That's right,
Yeah,
and putting
yeah.
it together again at the highest level, and you
Yeah.
as staff should decide, because you know your key milestones that you're gonna need to, quote, hit in order to
to get to the finish line,
to
yeah.
get to the finish line, and so we're not delineating that, or just, you know, it's just more like, help us understand what are, I'm just making this up. What are the 5 key, you know, milestones in order for you to reach that position control?
Yeah.
And what puts it at risk, and
Yeah,
by
right.
when, it's very similar to frontline in many ways,
Right,
you know,
yeah.
so.
It is. Well, a lot of it is actually gonna be
It is, yeah.
predicated on frontline, so that's gonna be one that may have a little longer runway. I mean, some of the basic elements definitely we've put in place and will continue, but that's the big piece.
So I think that could be kind of a template, then it sounds like, but I just wanted to at least. Have that discussion of kind of what the expectations are from the committee members around what we would say is, a plan that's detailed enough, that gives us the information that remain at the governance level.
And I do think, I mean, I am, like, I think we are at this point where, like, the board's attention is heightened. Like, you know, we are definitely, more, attentive to wanting to know more rather than, you know, we're not set it and forget it, I think, kind of mode. So I think to the extent that there's some oversharing, all the better at this point, in part because like, one of my concerns is that our fiscal experts are gonna want specificity about how these are going to be implemented, not just like, can you do the math? But like, then what comes after in order to implement the necessary choices? And so, and that's what hits the board and what hits our school sites and also affects our VBGGs. So I just wanna make sure that we're delivering implementable plans, and we're also keeping in mind that these aren't just fiscal decisions. Like,
Pam, I did want to ask, as we wrap up this this section of our, meeting, around the phase 2 beyond the, you know, June 30th of what we need to deliver to CDE. But as far as, for the fiscal stabilization plan, on how to stabilize the district's finances and operations, do you feel that you and the staff are clear around the specifics of what needs to be included moving forward?
I believe that your fiscal staff is aware of what needs to be included, and the superintendent we've talked with him also about that. And so really what it comes down to is, is the details. You can't just say, okay, we're gonna cut $50 million. You have to tell us what exactly is going to be cut to give you the $50 million. And I think that both Jackie and Candy are definitely aware of what needs to happen with that. And just kind of going back to what you were talking about previously about whether it be a dashboard or however it might be set up, when you're talking about, say, the FHRA report or how the audit report was, late the last couple of years, I think that those are things that, they've been progressively getting worse over the last couple of years, but now you've got staff who's more experienced and I think more focused on what needs to happen and when. And so we've already seen some change in the way that they're planning ahead for these audits and the different things that they have to provide. So I think that they are very much aware of it, but it is still a good, I think, way to handle the process is to go ahead and, like you said, list out, these are the things we need to do. This is when we're going to do it. This is who's responsible, and then have a timeline of when you're going to check back in and make sure so that nothing catches anybody by surprise. That the board isn't all of a sudden saying, oh, well, where's our audit? We're supposed to have it. And you're going, well, we had a problem. It's going to be 2 months later. It should never get to that point, really, within the district. They should be already aware of that this is, an issue and that they've taken care of it. So I think that your fiscal staff, yes, does understand what's necessary.
You want me just to reiterate? So, and we'll have the notes, next time, but when we started the conversation about what would be, our definitions of fiscal health and operational health. So just to reiterate, we said we were, for fiscal health, we were spending within our means. We have position control. We can follow each dollar and have controls over each dollar. We can justify our spending. And with operational health, we know who's doing what. We have a clear organizational structure and management protocols, internal communications, and clear decision-making. And there's just, an understood chain of command and accountability. So I think part of what we're driving at is, just to reiterate how we started our first ad hoc is, well, we know this is a little bit of an emergency moment. This is something that, we're supposed to be able to do without it being an emergency. And so it's not just stabilizing in response to June 30th, July 1st. It's about developing the internal systems that normalize this part of it. So that's a part of what the board is asking, that a lot of what the board is asking for is how do we get out from reacting and get more into the planning. And I'm hearing more and more planning and implementation focus. So it's not as if, this is new information, but I just want to reiterate that that's why this is an ad hoc committee.
Thank you for that summary. So, being attentive to time, I think part.
Yeah, no, I was saying, because President Matomedy has been good about when saying those things at the end of the meeting, following up with the email, because I mean, hopefully got the notes, but it's how you wrote them down.
Yeah.
Yes, they'll play in the minutes as well
But
as.
there are good questions.
President Matomedy can summarize.
Yeah.
I do want to take our last 10 minutes or so to talk about agreements between this committee and the superintendent as we are moving forward with the fiscal and operational health and sustainability of the district. Just taking a few moments to just do some level setting around, agreements that come forward for us in order to working together to achieve the fiscal and operational stability. So I don't want to spend too much time, but 3 or 4 agreements, that way we can always come back to them and reference them should we go off path and steer off veering. So it's just clear to the committee members and the superintendent. So I'll just open it up and we can just do popcorn thinking rises to you to the top.
Commissioner, clarifying question, you mean agreements in terms of operating within this group or
Yes, within this group.
during the meetings or?
Yes, because otherwise it would be the violation of Brown Act if we met.
Okay, I was
Yes.
trying to follow, okay.
And Do you want to start? Do you have something in mind?
I think for me, it's about, being transparent and to having authentic conversations. So I think the real talk we often say, right, being able to, having these tough conversations, and it's not about poking holes or undermining, but it's really towards a fiscal, overall health of the organization.
Well, maybe, I agree with that, and I think sort of maybe a specific example of that is, this would be the place, I mean, I think all commissioners are interested in hearing, what our fiscal advisors are telling district leadership, and I think that, this would be a place to make sure that it's not a game of telephone, and in fact, we're all hearing and understanding the same expectations, the same sort of, oh, great job, this is exactly what we want to see. And so this might be a place for that as well.
I think, yeah, I'll see.
Does staff want to add anything that would be helpful, from us as board members? Yeah, I mean,
This is in general, and I think it goes even to, progress monitoring. That when in the spirit of transparency, authentic engagement, the wisdom of the group is always better. I mean, that's why we meet as a team, otherwise someone could go alone to a room and do whatever they want. When the answer is I don't know, or you found a mistake, or you found a blind spot, it indicates that the democracy is working, that this is working, and that should not be seen as, even though we're saying not got to, but that means this is working. When you find a blind spot, when you find an area of growth, I see it as a success, and I guess I'm proposing that is seen that way. Not to say that, sorry, trying a lot of mitigating language here, not to say that it implies something different, but when we find something wrong, great. Thank you. Now we're better off because we collectively have identified how can we move forward. I offer that in the spirit of having hard conversations require that level of trust, and knowing that finding blind spots we should be able in common to say, I don't know the answer to that. Thank you. Then we get back to you. Or yeah, so that I guess.
I think one of the other things is to like have a real conversation, reflection on, how did we get here? Like, this isn't something that just happened overnight. This has been decades in the making. And now these are my words, no one else's words. The things that are in this district operationally are just not things that you would normally see in another district. And so, for the individuals here that are new and coming on board, yes, you want to get it all done. The reality is it's not all going to get done overnight. There are going to be things that you can immediately remedy. There are things maybe within the 3-month to 6-month timeline, but then there are other things, a new ERP system, that are gonna take a little bit longer because it's trying to set up the new system, but you're also having to clean up a lot of the underpinning stuff. And so there will be situations where you really want to hit a targeted deadline, but as you start to, like they say, peel the layers back, you'll find something that you did not expect. I've experienced that since I've been here. I know Jackie has. I'm sure many of the other folks have. In this space, I hope it's assumed with positive intentions that when things are coming up like that, we're sharing it, and it's not that it's being sat on. It will be done, but we're also having to reprioritize a plethora of priorities that we have to work through. Like, for example, right now in business services, this is a great conversation, but we're also trying to build $1 billion budget, I'm serious, on Excel spreadsheets, while we're also trying to do a third interim and a lot of other different things. And so the business services staff is working almost around the clock to get all of those things done. And so, yes, there may be instances where we say, and I'm gonna say right now, for budget adoption, you have a 12-day, we're supposed to get it to you 12 days in advance. I'm telling you now, we're not gonna get it to you 12 days in advance. It's just physically impossible because of all the other things that this team is working on. And you know what? It should be okay if we come and say that, because it's not that we're just sitting around eating bonbons. It is not the case. It is a lot of different things that they are having to pull together manually to get into, the SAS form so that we can produce, quality documents. And so rather than rush it, we'd rather say we need more time to give you the quality product that you deserve. And I think a lot of that also needs to be flushed out. So, just.
Yeah. Like I asked somebody here, like, how was your weekend? They said you spent 16 hours on the day working, so.
And I know she was, because she was emailing me. But that's fine.
I think that goes back to the authentic engagement, probably to be able to share, like, yes, because we are not. That's not our role to be in the daily or the weeds, but to be able to say, to hear, yeah, that 12 days is unlikely because of this manual, is that, again, that compounded effect of the lack of modernization. So to speak.
But it's very, I mean, we're just being kind, it's very real that sometimes that we all need to be pushed and nudged and with all that said, this does work, right? You playing a role, us playing a role and challenging each other to do more and think about how to do it better and being able to say, this will be late, not because we're not working on it, but because it will be, and having that trust that we're not dropping the ball, but actually that we know ahead is also very real.
And then that's where I think the key milestones is like, then, so what is realistic? If you can't get it by this date, then, then by which date? Right, so that we know how to.
Yeah, because I've definitely been in a mode of, I love no surprises. I love, like, it doesn't mean that like I want it right the first, all the time on time. It just means like, if it's not realistic, then what is realistic and how do we recalibrate? Like, how do we all, I would like to approach this place as where we're not individually protecting ourselves or, but we are working in the spirit of making sure that we are not surprised and we're collectively working together to build a better system. Which means sometimes having to be uncomfortable or, wish that we had, to be reflective on how that, I guess that's the main thing I would say, because, I don't want to wait till it's too late, because we're doing like this. So that's all I would say. And I don't know if Pam wants to add anything to.
Pam, did you wanna?
No, I agree. And even though that the CD has set that timeline of the 14 days ahead, in reality, we're working every day with Jackie and with Candy and looking at the numbers and what they're moving forward with. So we're aware of the challenges they're facing in putting this all together and in such a short time frame and with limited staff. So we're not I guess we're flexible to a certain point. And so when it ends up being the end result that we need and it gets to the board in time and you're able to take a look at it and know that the information you have is accurate, that's really the most important piece at this time. So I feel good about you having those conversations that they know exactly what is going to happen and move forward with those deadlines. But I think you're all approaching this in the right way. And I have to say, I'm hoping that as we go through this process, I would think that everybody here is kind of learning something new about the budget or how it works and moving forward more than what they had in the past. And I know Jackie's kind of smiling. She's like, she knows the budget by it's in memory now. But no, it is something that I think is very important for everybody to be aware of. And in the plan that Dr. Wayne has put together and moving forward, I think there's going to be a lot of decisions to be made. But the bottom line is we want to make sure that the most is being spent on what the kids need. And So it's unfortunate then if you have times in the past where you've had money come in that could have been used for something maybe a little bit different than what it was to basically just be able to cover up, a shortfall here or there. So having that planning in play, I think is going to be the best solution for all of you.
So, I'm gonna wrap this up for the evening. So I will polish up the agreements, and forward it on, for us as a committee to just adopt formally at our next June 13th, so that's recorded. We will have both sets of minutes, both from our first, ad hoc committee meeting as well as tonight, also ready for review and approval for the June 13th. Again, my apologies for not getting those, teed up for this evening. And I will also bring forward some possible dates for trainings for the board, because I know that that we also have a couple of great city schools held on our dates in June right now, but I also want to have some dates for the fiscal governance and kind of ramping up as a board, our skill development on knowing how to, monitor, build our upskilling and our own understanding of financial and operational health for the district. So I will also bring that forward for the June 13th for the committee for consideration and also in alignment with board leadership, since they have a good viewpoint of our upcoming next 6 months. So I think that is my summary. Any closing thoughts from committee members or the superintendent? Big appreciations to the staff. I know again, these back-to-back meetings and to the point of the business and human resource and fiscal team. I know y'all are burning all hours of the night, but just appreciate you all. Thank you so much. And I'll-
There's a lot there, so at least I need the keys to someone like to get. Like, you cannot leave.